Sometimes it's killers chasing other killers, and sometimes it's cops closing in on Dexter himself. Across the series, Dexter Morgan faces every kind of opponent, from small-time murderers all the way to criminal masterminds who could realistically expose or even outsmart him. In this video, I'm ranking these characters based on two factors. First, intelligence, their ability to outplan, outplay, and outthink the people around them. And second, danger, their physical threat level, their willingness to kill, and the resources or influence they can bring to the table. Let's get into it. In this tier, we mostly have small fries who can be situational threats or maybe have above average intelligence, but can never be long-term threats. First is Paul Bennett, who is Rita's abusive ex-husband, who enters the story early in season 1. His threats to Rita and her children, erratic behavior, and abusive past make him a significant emotional antagonist for Dexter. But by Dexter's world standards, he's relatively low danger. He doesn't plan murders, manipulate complex crimes, or evade police in a way killers do. Most of his offense is domestic abuse, emotional cruelty, and intimidation. Dexter knocks him out with a frying pan, easily frames him with heroin, and ultimately gets him arrested. So overall, Paul Bennett is dangerous in a personal domestic abuse sense, enough to threaten people close to Dexter, but is not a threat. Louis Green is Vince Masuka's third lab intern and a self-described tech genius who develops video games. He's competent with hacking, data gathering, and digital tools, which gives him niche intelligence that could be useful in an investigation. His obsession with Dexter drives him to reckless moves. He creates a serial killer themed game, shows it to Dexter, and then escalates to sending that weird ice truck killer arm to Dexter's house and trying to sabotage Dexter's boat after Dexter humiliates him. In terms of danger, Louis is more of a reputational threat than a physical one. His skills could have been a real problem if he had any persistence or malice, street smarts, or any killer instinct. His petty vendettas expose him and cost him his relationship. Ultimately, he's killed in a violent mix-up tied to Isaac Serco's gang, which shows that Louis was not built like that and had no motion. Joey Quinn, a detective with Miami Metro, is pretty much an average cop dude man. He nearly catches Dexter after investigating everything about Rita's death, noticing several oddities around Rita's murder, like how Rita's murder was inconsistent with Trinity's usual MO. He follows up on those hunches, examines the composite sketch of Kyle Butler, speculates that Dexter could have killed Rita, and eventually hires Stan Liddy to gather evidence for him. However, Quinn has important weaknesses. His emotional attachments, particularly to Debra, cloud his judgment. He suspends or abandons pursuit when it risks his relationship with her and his job. Overall, Quinn is a slightly above average cop dude with some potential when he's digging, but never quite lethal enough to catch Dexter. He seems dangerous because of breadcrumbs laid out for him, but his inability to commit fully or outmaneuver Dexter consistently keeps him from being anything special, only getting as close to Dexter as he did because of the Trinity Killer shenanigans. Similar to how Doakes caught on to Dexter because of the ice truck killer shenanigans. In the end, this whole thing only started because Dexter, while in shock, told the cops that he killed Rita. So overall, Joey is just a replacement for James Doakes, but with none of the godly persistence, trading that for an actual social life. In a way that makes him better than Doakes, at least in terms of being happy and getting his priorities straight. Miguel Prado. He's pretty charming and has to be pretty smart to be an assistant district attorney. At first, Miguel appears to be an ally. After Dexter kills Freebo, Miguel sympathizes with him, even helps conceal evidence. But his misadventure with Dexter unlocks his true personality that was dormant. He desires power, control, and overall wants to murder anyone he deems as evil. He manipulates Dexter, giving him a bloody shirt as collateral so Dexter can trust him, pushing him to take part in killing, and eventually letting personal vendettas, such as killing Ellen Wolf, an innocent, outweigh any sense of justice. In terms of intelligence, Miguel displays high social and political cunning. He's skilled at leveraging his ADA position, courtroom influence, and public respect to stay above suspicion. He's like a weird mix of Gus Fring and Saul Goodman. He knows how to play legal loopholes, persuade people, and maintain a public image. Because of that, he becomes dangerous to Dexter when their relationship turns sour. However, his weaknesses are his arrogance, impulsiveness, and instability that lead him to make miscalculations. He fails to contain his darker side, which ultimately causes him to be outmaneuvered and killed by Dexter, who has far better control over his dark side. To be honest, Miguel never did anything really impressive and needed Dexter's guidance on how to murder and get away with it. Overall, he seems like how you would expect, a lawyer man who was way over his crazy head. Stan Liddy is a corrupt narcotics detective in Miami Metro whose investigative threat comes close to exposing Dexter. By profession, he's been involved in shady narcotics work and fired for corruption, but his skills as an investigator, though unorthodox, make him a surprisingly serious danger. Liddy is hired by Joey Quinn to dig up evidence against Dexter. He conducts illegal surveillance, including setting up cameras in Dexter's apartment, follows Dexter and Lumen's movements, takes photographs of their suspicious activities such as moving luggage by boat, and attempts to build a case. In a way, he stalked Dexter better than Doakes ever did. He even tries to manipulate Dexter into confessing, promising that Lumen walks free. However, Liddy's effectiveness is limited by his corruption, lack of access to legal proof, and reckless methods. The evidence he gathers is usually inadmissible or compromised. He oversteps boundaries with surveillance equipment and breaks laws he'd need to use in order to make the case stick, and ultimately engages Dexter in a confrontation that leads to his death. Besides, there's no proof he'd even catch on to Dexter if he wasn't told to follow him by Quinn in the first place. Overall, Liddy is more intelligent and dangerous than most cops in his ability to sniff out Dexter's suspicious behavior and act on it. However, he followed Dexter while Dexter didn't even know he existed. Not as impressive compared to Doakes, who made Dexter know he was watching him. Tier 3 is where we start getting mid-level people who are strong enough to fight Dexter or smart enough to actually put him in jail for good, given the right situation. First in this tier is Jordan Chase. Jordan is one of Dexter's more cerebral villains. He's more dangerous in how he uses power, influence, and manipulation. He's a best-selling author, motivational speaker, and public personality. With his Take It Now philosophy and Jordan Chase Enterprises built around seminars, books, merchandise, and whatnot. My point is that his public image gives him legitimacy and cover. Behind that though, Chase leads a secret circle of men who torture and murder young women. Crimes committed with layers of trust, denial, and group complicity. He has security, goons, and legal business that shield his activities. Getting to weaknesses though, his reliance on others means he's vulnerable if those layers crack. Meaning if his friends snitch on him, it's over. Dexter and Lumen exploit the fact that he needs goons and ultimately he ends up being not much. Overall, the gimmick for his season is more about catching a group of bad guys, which sacrifices Jordan's individual skills. He pretty much has his goons and friends do everything for him, not really getting hands on himself, which nerfs him. Still pretty smart though to run his business and this side killer gig without getting caught, until Dexter shows up anyway. Next up is Debra Morgan, who's a pretty good detective. She figured out some good clues in regards to the trimmed trees in the Skinner case. It showed some true pattern recognition and situational awareness. It showed that when she's focused, she can put subtle environmental clues together. It's honestly something I could see L from Death Note doing. Only he would notice a clue like that. However, that being said, in every other case, she usually needs Dexter's help. Not to mention constantly having help from the rest of the police department. Hell, even in the Skinner case, she needed Dexter's help later on. Her figuring out Dexter was the Bay Harbor Butcher was because she caught him already killing someone, and anyone in her position would piece together the many clues and hints that were already there. If Dexter hadn't screwed up and killed Travis at the church, Debra would have never caught on. She overall had a potential similar to Maria, but needed lots of guidance from others and clues just begging to be discovered by her. To be fair, her being close to Dexter probably made her ignore the clues to begin with. There's surprisingly not much to say about her since almost everything she does is soiled by Dexter's assistance. Angela Bishop is the chief of the cops in Iron Lake, who is pretty good and nearly catches Dexter. Though with some good luck due to stuff like Batista telling her about Dexter's son for no reason. Wasn't as smart as the blood analyst dude and wasn't smart enough to catch Kurt Cardwell, failing to catch him for 25 years. However, she's still considered by Dexter to be a good cop, at least compared to the morons around her. Dexter thought the cops in Angela's jurisdiction to be easy mode and considered getting caught by them to be embarrassing. So her being the best of them isn't that impressive. A good cop, but there's nothing to say she's above average or anything special. Overall, her feat of catching Dexter was her getting lucky over and over again. Even to the point where the main villain of the season literally mailed her a letter telling her straight up Dexter is a killer. She pretty much has everything handed to her. She even needed Dexter's help in finding out what happened to her sister. Again, nothing special. Next is Kurt Caldwell. I would say it's impressive he never got caught for 20 plus years, even though he killed a couple of dozen women, but the only people looking for him were just a bunch of low-level cops. Also, his back and forth with Dexter wasn't that impressive. His plan to kill Dexter's son in front of him was not smart at all, and he relied on his goon to catch Dexter off guard and kidnap him. His plan to snipe him and Harrison as they were coming out of their house was okay, but he f***ed up because he never confirmed that they were actually home in the first place. He got lucky they didn't follow him to his bunker because they were distracted and somehow didn't see him go inside the hole. Overall, he was fine for a guy that didn't have smart cops going after him. Pretty much playing the game on easy mode. Next up is Maria Lagueta. It can kind of seem like she's not really a cop and mostly used politics to get where she's at. However, in season 7 when she sees a blood slide that Dexter left at the church, it was only then that she finally realizes Dexter might be the Bay Harbor Butcher and comes up with a really clever plan to catch Dexter. What she did was get the killer of Dexter's mom, Hector Estrada, out of prison as a trap for Dexter, predicting he'll try and kill Hector, then try to catch him in the act with a couple of cops. A proactive and original strategy many good detectives in fiction would complement. However, she would have never caught on if it wasn't for Doakes telling her Dexter was suspicious multiple times, having more personal knowledge of Doakes compared to everyone else. This knowledge made it hard to believe Doakes was ever the Bay Harbor Butcher. You can argue this situation awakened her inner talent for being a detective, that they were dormant and never got a time to shine until the Dexter situation. In the end, she underestimated how much Debra loved her brother and paid the price. Ray Speltzer, aka the Minotaur Slayer, is one of the most physically powerful killers in the Dexterverse. His ritual involves constructing a maze inside his home, running around with a bull-like helmet, and hunting women with an axe. Pretty much a sick game for him. In direct combat, he overpowers Dexter, knocks him unconscious, and nearly kills him inside the labyrinth, forcing him to retreat. Few killers in the series ever physically dominate Dexter this way, which speaks to his raw threat level. However, Speltzer's intelligence is the weak part. He is eventually arrested after sloppy mistakes, including confessing during interrogation. Though legal technicalities set him free, and this reflects flaws in the system more than his ability to manipulate or outsmart it. Unlike masterminds such as Dexter or Trinity, Ray leaves evidence behind and relies on brute force rather than brain. Overall, Speltzer the short-term threat, he's lethal in close quarters but not very smart. His blend of extreme violence and poor foresight makes him a dangerous but ultimately mid-level threat. Pretty much all brawn and no brain. Tier 2 is where we start getting characters who pose extreme physical danger and are smart enough to consistently pressure Dexter in intelligence, no matter the situation. Pretty much where things start becoming hard mode for someone like Dexter. Oliver Saxon, aka the Brain Surgeon, is one of Dexter's most intimidating late series villains. A man who erased his identity, lived under an alias, and carried out a string of gruesome murders involving removing parts of people's brains. His ruthlessness is undeniable. He murdered his own mother, Dr. Evelyn Vogel, and even killed his brother as a child. He could blend into society convincingly, maintaining relationships under his fake persona, and in a final confrontation he proved capable of adapting, stabbing Dexter with a pen and resisting capture multiple times. Even his ability to frame Lyle Sussman as a patsy shows he wasn't just brutal, but knew how to misdirect investigators. But Saxon's flaws keep him out of tier 1. Unlike true masterminds, he lacked long-term strategy and often reacted on emotion, such as attempting to murder Debra in a hospital like an idiot. And his kill count remained fairly low compared to Dexter or Trinity, for example. Overall, Saxon is more dangerous than many mid-level threats, but he falls short of the transcendent planners at the very top. Next is Claudette Wallace. She's a detective in New York who seems kinda quirky and a little bit of an asshole, but the trade-off is that she's a very good detective, pretty much carrying her entire department. If Angela in Iron Lake is like easy mode, then New York is more like hard mode for serial killers. Her observational skills are top notch and is the only one to ascertain Harrison is the one who killed Ryan Foster at the hotel, being able to see through all of his professional attempts at hiding the fact that a murder took place in a bathroom. She pretty much caught Harrison but didn't have any evidence and was this close to convincing him to confess to the killing, but it took Dexter coming up with a genius plan to frame Lady Vengeance for the killing. Lady Vengeance is known for killing sexual predators, and Ryan Foster just so happened to be a sexual predator. So Dexter makes that connection and hides Ryan's watch in Mia's home, making it look like she killed him instead of Harrison. Considering how genius this was, I actually don't blame Claudette for falling for this. The actual truth seems way too crazy to believe, though she did note how Mia's fingerprints weren't on the watch. I believe she'll notice that the Bay Harbor Butcher trophy is gone from Prater's vault, and then remember the lack of fingerprints on the watch, and will finally believe the Bay Harbor Butcher is still out there. Anyway, overall, she's a genius who is definitely smarter than every other cop in this verse besides Frank Lundy and Dexter respectively. Despite how smart she seems, she however couldn't figure out the identity of the New York Ripper along with all the killers in Prater Zakotski. If anything, not getting caught by Claudette upscales killers like Mia and the rest of the group. Even if I think Claudette has more pure intellect than everyone in this tier, the people above her just have more going on. Lowell Sloan, aka the Tattoo Collector, is a serial killer who targets people with tattoos and then cuts off the tattoo he likes, taking the skin with him as his trophy. Decently similar to the Skinner, however, this guy seems much less impressive, showing no feats or skills in combat. It's difficult to say Lowell would even be a multi-episode villain if Dexter didn't already know his identity and how he kills. He, however, never gets caught by the police, and it took Dexter just to deal with him. You can argue that's decently impressive. Besides that, he's definitely the weakest out of the serial killer Akatsuki, not seeming as calculating as his comrades. Mia LaPierre, aka Lady Vengeance, is a serial killer who kills sexual predators due to one assaulting her younger sister when she was 15. It seems like at first Mia has a code and only murders predators, but she later reveals to Dexter she kills just about anyone, even if they did nothing wrong. Killing men to create the rush of her first kill, she just enjoys killing and acts on the urge whenever she has it. Besides never getting caught by the police, she isn't shown to be that intelligent and mostly relies on her good looks to lure men into her home and kill them. Not really something impressive. There's nothing extra about her kills, like mega prepping like Dexter. While one can argue it's dumb to have murder trophies which puts a killer at risk of getting caught, it's actually impressive to keep them around casually like she does and still not get caught. Overall, she's a mostly typical serial killer, most likely being smarter than people who only kill a single time since she has to be, or else she would have been caught a long time ago. Al Walker, aka Rapunzel, is a serial killer who murders women with ponytails and keeps the hair as his trophy. He's similar to Trinity in the sense that he seems more normal on the surface and has a family, successfully being able to separate and balance his two lives like what Dexter and Trinity tried to do before, which is impressive. Since he just ambushes women in the middle of nowhere, there's nothing impressive about his kills at all. I guess the trade-off for having easy bait kills is being able to raise a family, where Dexter and Trinity's respective murders were much more complicated and difficult. However, same as the others where he's impressive for never getting caught by the cops, but there's nothing too impressive about the actual kills, nor has he ever been in a back and forth with Dexter where I doubt he would give Dexter trouble like Trinity once did. Walter Kenny, aka the Tooth Fairy Killer. I decided to include him since he's one of the few serial killers who successfully escaped the police and was never caught decades later. He even left the body of one of his victims on the deputy sheriff's lawn. The police, I imagine, saw that as a challenge, and thus obviously the police would have tried even harder to catch him, but yet never did. He did this while drunk too, yet he still got away. It can be argued that escaping police in Salem, Oregon isn't as impressive as escaping police in Miami or New York City, but nonetheless, young Dexter looked up to the Tooth Fairy Killer and considered him impressive. Decades later, while an old man, Kenny quickly saw through Dexter's facade. Suspicious of Dexter's probing, Kenny later called him under the guise of being stranded. Once inside Dexter's car, Kenny revealed that he had run Dexter's license plate and discovered his connection to Miami Metro homicide. Something not many killers would have done. He had Dexter cornered, but then Dexter adapted and crashed his car. Despite Dexter killing him afterward, the encounter proved that Kenny's instincts and resourcefulness were intact even in an old age. While not physically dominant, his ability to identify Dexter's double life so quickly and act on it cements him as a surprisingly dangerous adversary. Hannah McKay, a dangerous woman who poisons multiple people and was never caught by the police, at least until Dexter caught on to her anyway. It took Sal Price, an investigative journalist, to get an outside lab to run an analysis on the Wayne Randall murders, which put Hannah on Debra's radar. However, it is worth mentioning that Hannah's father, Clint McKay, gave Sal Price information on Hannah, basically snitching on her. She basically needed some bad luck for people to catch on to her, which I think is impressive. She has some decent manipulation, being able to lie to cops successfully and win Dexter over to her side. Not that she didn't have feelings for him, but just that she talked him down multiple times on him getting her in trouble. When Jacob Elway had her almost dead to rights, she managed to trick him and get away. Her biggest mistake was trying to murder Debra, underestimating Dexter's intelligence and actually thinking she could get away with it without Dexter finding out. She overall can kill or catch most of the people on this list lacking as long as they don't know she's after them. Like how she caught Dexter and Debra by surprise but let them live. Gareth Pike, aka the Gemini Killer, is the smartest out of the serial killer Akatsuki in my opinion. He's the main one we see at all the meetings and not his twin who got killed by Dexter first. He's smart enough to never meet his brother and only communicate to him via notes and books. With his brother, Gareth went on to kill at least 32 people, all of them being in pairs, which you would think would only make it easier for the cops to catch them, but they never got caught nonetheless. Gareth seemed more professional compared to the rest, and you can argue he was the only one to suspect Dexter of being up to no good. It's sort of unlikely, and he never expressed that he knew the whole time toward the end, seemingly genuinely surprised when Dexter revealed himself. Besides simply liking to kill, Gareth and his brother had the goal of being the best serial killer in history, which thankfully they failed due to their ego and arrogance. They let their intelligence get to their head and were easily manipulated by Dexter, the ego being a guide and shortcut to being manipulated and taken advantage of. Next is George King, aka the Skinner, is a high-intensity threat and clever killer. He's a former Contra army captain and interrogator who moved to Miami after the war, running a tree trimming company as a cover. His torture background makes him familiar with military combat and interrogation skills, primarily skinning his victims as a way to break them. George is intelligent in his methods. He watches homes undercover, kidnaps and tortures people, and uses his landscaping business as a cover for surveillance on his victims. However, his motive seems to be sheer sadism, which doesn't quite equate to long-term strategy. He's not shown to outthink Dexter, and Dexter is able to read George like a book. All his methods do is heighten the chances of him getting caught. Overall, George King is physically and psychologically dangerous, but not a master strategist. Now for the one and only, James Doakes. He's a brilliant cop with experience in the military to help him out. He has the best instincts in the show, tied with Dexter, or even better perhaps. There's a mechanic where if you're a killer, then you're able to sense other killers, which Doakes possessed due to killing people as a cop on the job. However, that shouldn't count as pure detective skill. I guess it's more like wisdom? He's not as clever as Dexter, but was equally, if not more persistent and dedicated to his goal to the point he'd spend all his off hours just trying to catch Dexter. Besides Brian Moser, he was the only one to find Dexter's blood slides. Despite all that, he only caught on to Dexter because the plot line with the ice truck killer dropped hints and clues for Dexter to pick up on. He didn't catch on due to pure detective skill like Claudette, for example. In the end, he relied more so on the ability to sense other killers rather than detective work. However, I will say he does have godly persistence and really good willpower. As for his weaknesses, he's kind of a hard ass and doesn't get along with many people, not even connecting with his family very well. Something Debra easily did and embarrassed him, highlighting Doakes' weak social skills. I'm sure if he had more friends, they could have helped him in catching Dexter maybe, but Doakes just had to do everything by himself. Charlotte Brown, aka Charlie, is a former special ops operator who worked at several security agencies until Leon Prater found her and took her under his wing, making Charlie his head of security. On top of typical security, Prater has Charlie investigate serial killers, and she's able to successfully track them down and figure out their identities. How much help she has thanks to Prater's resources is unknown, however, so I can't say she's better than entire police departments and the FBI or anything crazy like that. It took her weeks to track down the Dark Passenger, while it took Dexter only a few days. Though Dexter got lucky, his friend just so happens to know another friend who has a video footage of the Dark Passenger, something Charlie didn't have access to. That being said, she's top tier in terms of combat and gun skills and is overall the Mike of the series, but is susceptible to getting caught by surprise. However, getting caught by Dexter isn't too big of an anti-feat, in my opinion. Her main weakness is people taking advantage of her love for her sick mother, the only thing that can make her emotional. It's worth noting that it's impressive she was the only one to be suspicious of Dexter, though I expected nothing less from her and would have been disappointed if she didn't find Dexter sus. She was most likely nerfed that Prater told her multiple times to leave Dexter alone. So the main thing affecting her ranking is how much help she had thanks to Prater's resources and money when she caught multiple serial killers. For now, I'll just judge her as if she did half the work. After all, usually the FBI and the cops are nerfed by the law, while Charlie would freely break into any suspect's house and simply cheat to get her way, not playing by any rules. Next is Travis Marshall, also known as the Doomsday Killer, is one of Dexter's most disturbing foes because of his ritualistic and theatrical nature of his murders. Introduced in Season 6, Travis appears to be acting under the direction of Professor James Geller, but it's ultimately revealed that Geller has been dead for years. Travis had murdered him and projected him as a hallucination, committing every crime alone with no help. He successfully carried out a string of elaborate symbolic killings such as the Four Horsemen tableau and the other biblical end of days displays, without suspicion falling on him for much of the season. His artistic background as a museum conservator gave him the technical skill to craft horrifyingly creative crime scenes that baffled Miami Metro until Dexter intervened. However, his weakness is that he's unstable. His delusional reliance on the imagined Geller made him unpredictable and less disciplined than masterminds like Trinity. Dexter ultimately exploited this fractured psyche to take him down. Overall, Travis is a dangerous, intelligent killer whose ritualistic creativity sets him apart, but his mental instability keeps him from reaching top-tier mastermind status. If Dexter knew the truth about him, he would have easily taken Travis down. Isaac Serco is one of Dexter's most formidable adversaries, a crime lord whose blend of power, combat skill, and charm makes him a mega badass. As the leader of the Koshka Brotherhood, a Ukrainian criminal syndicate with operations in Miami, Serco has resources, loyalty, and deadly networks at his disposal. Serco's intelligence shows in how much he navigates both business and betrayal. When Viktor Bashkov, his lover and lieutenant, disappears, Serco pursues a trail to Miami, uses Louis Green's sabotage of Dexter's boat to track Dexter down, and shoots Louis when he discovers that Dexter owns a slice of life. He's quick to adapt. Once Dexter becomes a threat, he tries to confront Dexter himself directly but also has to change plans and threatens Hannah's life so Dexter can help him. In danger terms, Serco is physically powerful, brutal, and fearless. He managed to solo an entire bar full of armed people, much to Dexter's surprise. By getting to his weaknesses, Isaac is vulnerable to betrayal inside his own organization, often reacts impulsively when driven by rage or grief, particularly over Viktor. Overall, Serco has brains, resources, and lethal potential. He's probably the most similar to Lalo Salamanca from Better Call Saul. While he lacks the pure mastermind planning of Dexter, Isaac is among the elites who could push Dexter to his limits. In Tier 1, we finally get to actual masterminds who are extremely difficult for Dexter to kill or outsmart. First up is Frank Lundy, who is one of the most capable foes Dexter ever faces, combining professional experience, sharp intellect, and enough persistence to make Dexter genuinely afraid multiple times that the end was near. Frank is introduced in Season 2 as the head of the FBI task force investigating the Bay Harbor Butcher case. Lundy has solved extremely difficult cases and is known for being calm under pressure, excellent at spotting patterns and connecting dots that others miss. Pretty much the closest thing to L from Death Note in this verse. Lundy has profile and pattern recognition, noticing subtle differences between MOs. For example, comparing the Bay Harbor Butcher and the Ice Truck Killer, and insists on thinking beyond obvious suspects, including the possibility of law enforcement involvement. As an FBI special agent, he has access to more intelligence tools, interagency collaboration, and has more authority over the entire Miami Police Department. He has real national level experience, which most of the Miami PD characters do not have. He sees the big picture while many cops focus on the individual cases or local homicides. Lundy bridges MOs, locations, and timelines, thinking in decades and even across jurisdictions. He also gets Debra on the task force because he sees how good she could be, guiding her and unlocking her potential in a way, similar to how Dexter also helps Debra. He even sees how smart Dexter is and potentially sees him as the most useful person on the case. So this probably grants Lundy some kind of intelligence sensing trait, which he takes advantage of to help solve cases. Getting onto his weaknesses, Lundy doesn't have perfect foresight. Even with his intelligence, Dexter's still able to mislead Lundy, frame Doakes, destroy evidence, and stay ahead. Lundy's suspicions often come late or derailed by Dexter's manipulation or luck. Also, he's pretty old. Maybe a prime Lundy could fight, but definitely not the Lundy we see in the show. So overall, Lundy's intelligence is elite. Pattern recognition, profiling, investigative persistence, and a deep understanding of criminal behavior. So the trait that Doakes and Dexter have, which is the ability to recognize killers, Lundy doesn't need that and instead relies more on pure intelligence, which is why Lundy rightfully ranks in tier 1. Few others than Dexter are as able to force Dexter to adapt or slip up under pressure. To be honest, it's possible Dexter would have been caught by Lundy if it wasn't for the whole Doakes situation falling right into Dexter's lap. Lundy already knew the Bay Harbor Butcher was a cop, so if it wasn't for Doakes taking the blame, I actually don't know how Dexter would have defeated Lundy. Next is Leon Prater. He's a billionaire venture capitalist who just so happens to be very interested in serial killers, to the point he invites them to his manor. With all his money and influence, he somehow was able to obtain artifacts from serial killers throughout history. Stuff you would think it would be in a police vault or something. He seems to have influence everywhere, even being able to get a cop at prison to kill Mia. At his manor, he has an entire army of men ready to defend him in case of any emergencies. However, he usually always has Charlie there with him at all times just in case, someone who could kill most people on this entire list. With Charlie and his nearly infinite resources, he's able to figure out the identity of multiple serial killers before the police and is able to act freely under the nose of Detective Wallace like nothing. If he was more moral and actually wanted to stop these people, Prater could pretty much catch any serial killer on the planet unless you argue everyone in his little Akatsuki are all mid and would have gotten caught sooner or later. There is however not enough evidence to say him and Charlie would be able to catch killers on the level of Dexter. While Prater is a business genius, he was easily manipulated by Dexter and was tricked into defending Dexter due to so badly wanting a real connection with a real serial killer. Obviously, physically he's not a threat, but he is potentially the most dangerous person due to his resources and connections, his little empire being more impressive than multiple government agencies like the FBI. Arthur Mitchell, aka the Trinity Killer, is able to kill multiple people in multiple places around the country for decades and not get caught, making him one of the smartest people in the list. Even Agent Lundy couldn't catch him. He most likely has the highest kill count of any serial killer in the world with nearly 300 kills. The only reason anyone could even find a pattern to his killings is because he purposely made a pattern, and even then Lundy could never complete the full puzzle, failing to realize there was a fourth piece, not only 3. He's also able to do this while having a family at the same time, something Dexter could barely do. That being said, Dexter eventually found him and easily could have killed him at any point, but Dexter made things more difficult by trying to befriend Arthur and learn things from him instead of killing him. However, when Trinity finally realized Dexter was an enemy, their back and forth battle was pretty competitive and impressive. Most people wouldn't have the smarts to follow Dexter the way he did and find out his real identity, despite losing in the end to Dexter. Which leads us to Dexter Morgan, aka the Bay Harbor Butcher. aka the main character, is, as you could probably guess, one of the smartest and most dangerous people, not just on this list, but in all of fiction. He's killed nearly 200 people, and after decades, despite some close calls, has never gotten caught by the police. The only 2 times he was actually caught red-handed was by Debra Morgan, twice. But both times were because of Dexter's slip-ups and because his general assistance in her police work is the only reason those situations even happened in the first place. Then the other time was when Doakes followed him by putting a tracker on his boat, which he managed to escape because Doakes f***ed up and because of Dexter's superior fighting skills. Speaking of which, in college, Dexter learned some martial arts, specifically Jiu-Jitsu and Judo. He knows particular weak points of humans that he can aim for with a knife, knowing where exactly each artery is located. Probably even knowing pressure points he could take advantage of as well if he doesn't have a weapon. He effortlessly handled ex-military forces like Doakes and the Skinner. Even an ex-special op like Charlie didn't want to open the vault Dexter was trapped in, despite her having a gun. Moving on to Dexter's intelligence, I could be here for an hour going into detail on everything impressive he's ever done, but I'm gonna try my best to keep it concise. He's a blood splatter analyst, being able to visualize entire events and murders just by looking at the trajectory of blood on the wall. He's so good that a genius detective like Claudette didn't even know which weapon the New York Ripper used in their killings, but Dexter is able to tell her which weapon the killer used just by looking at some pictures of the crime scenes. Besides that, Dexter is also just a pretty good detective due to his experience of tracking down serial killers, making him better than every other actual detective in the verse besides maybe Frank Lundy. Dexter is so good that he casually tricks other detectives into believing whatever he wants for his own goals all the time, usually by planting evidence at important locations or by manipulating them. Speaking of which, Dexter is a master at manipulating, lying, and getting away with his murders all the time with just his words. Angel states that's what Dexter does. He blends in and tricks everyone around him no matter where he goes. The only person to see through Dexter's lies and his behavior is James Doakes, though probably only because Doakes is a killer himself, since people smarter than Doakes, like Lundy, couldn't see what Doakes saw in Dexter. Even other killers like Trinity couldn't see through Dexter's persona, so maybe you actually need to be both a killer and a detective at the same time just to see through Dexter's mask. Dexter uses the same combo as a detective and a killer to psychologically read other killers, giving him insight that other detectives couldn't dream of having. His genius level intellect makes sense considering he was at the top of his class in medical school, making him able to become a full-on doctor. But he chose to settle for blood analyzing instead, just because he gets excitement from looking at crime scenes. I would wank Dexter for how easily he catches serial killers that even the FBI can't catch, but it's worth noting that he does cheat by doing illegal things that the cops can't do, like breaking into a suspect's house to look for clues or something. Also, he'll regularly bounce off of other detectives' work and get their help, just like how other detectives in fiction like Elle from Death Note or Patrick Jane from The Mentalist do. Usually he has to nerf the cops by messing with their evidence and putting them on the wrong trail just so he can get his hands on the serial killers before the cops. That being said, a lot of times the only reason the police are on the right trail to begin with is because of Dexter's immense help. Regardless, Dexter gets hints and clues from Frank Lundy about the Trinity Killer, which leads to Dexter finding out his real identity before the FBI even could. It actually surprised me how fast Dexter caught the Trinity Killer, but it made sense just because Dexter chose to nerf himself and not kill Arthur just so he can get advice on how to raise a family as a serial killer. If he just killed him immediately, the season would have just ended, so. Which leads me to Dexter's weaknesses. He usually nerfs himself because of his code where he can only kill evil people and he needs definitive proof of their wrongdoings before he can kill them. The other weakness is him wanting to juggle his life as a killer and his life as a family man. This is a particular goal he'll always have trouble with, and he ultimately failed when the Trinity Killer murdered his wife. He's currently trying again with his son to juggle both lives, but we'll see if he actually learned from his mistakes. It's actually impressive how long he got away with these shenanigans and still hasn't been caught despite these nerfs he puts on himself. The most difficult time he probably has was when Lundy was investigating the Bay Harbor Butcher and James Doakes was on his ass specifically, and he had to deal with Lila West's antics all at the same time, yet somehow still came out smelling like roses. The big debate I'm having with myself is if Dexter has the luck trait that I brought up in my Breaking Bad video. There are multiple times Dexter got really lucky and would have been boned otherwise. For example, Doakes found all of Dexter's blood slides, but the cops just so happened to find the blood slides and concluded Doakes was the Bay Harbor Butcher this whole time. Which is extremely convenient for Dexter because Lundy already suspected the Butcher was a cop at Miami Metro, which Doakes just so happens to be, guess what, a cop at Miami Metro. Which leads to Doakes escaping his cage, but just so happens to get captured by drug dealers who led him right back to the cabin Doakes was at. Which Dexter comes right on time to kill the dealers and puts Doakes right back in the cage. Dexter was actually going to turn himself in to the police completely since killing Doakes goes against his code. But Lila came out of nowhere and killed Doakes for Dexter, preventing Dexter from making any difficult choices and preventing a potentially troubling future for Dexter where Doakes is in prison telling people Dexter is a serial killer. Then there was Debra catching Dexter and Lumen killing Jordan Chase, but then deciding to walk away and not even see who the killers are. The time Dexter was left stranded in the ocean, a boat just so happened to come in and save him from drowning. Then there was the time Maria's plan to catch Dexter killing Hector was foiled because Hector mentioned Maria is the one that got him out of jail, which made Dexter realize what she was up to. Minutes before Maria and some cops were gonna catch Dexter. In New Blood, he got lucky that the bullet in his chest didn't kill him due to cold weather. Then in Resurrection, Dexter's new friend just so happens to have another friend who has video footage of the killer Dexter is looking for, giving Dexter a big clue. I could keep going, but you get my point. Dexter is a decently lucky guy, which gives him an unfair advantage over everyone else below him, but I think there's one character that's better than him in almost every way. I think the smartest and most dangerous person in the whole verse is Brian Moser, aka the Ice Truck Killer. Dexter may be the main character, but if you really think about it, Brian is just Dexter without any of the nerfs. He's got the same childhood trauma, the same genius level ability to read crime scenes and manipulate evidence, and the same capacity for violence. The only difference is that Brian actually uses those same tools to their maximum potential without a code holding him back. Where Dexter limits himself with morality games, Brian goes full throttle. He doesn't need definitive proof before killing, he doesn't hesitate, and that makes him way more dangerous than Dexter ever was. Brian's whole ice truck killer arc is proof that he can outthink Dexter. He staged every kill not just to cover his tracks, but to communicate directly with his brother, taunting not only the police, but taunting Dexter at the same time, pretending to be a guy named Rudy, getting engaged to his sister, and living rent-free in Dexter's personal life without ever being suspected. That's manipulation on a level Dexter can only try and mimic later on in the show. His ideas impressed Dexter to the point Dexter admired him in the way he did things, like draining his victim's blood, for example. He was also the first one to find Dexter's blood slide before anyone else ever could, something even the cops or Lundy couldn't manage. The police were certainly nothing to him, and most likely Lundy would have needed to intervene for a real challenge to appear if Dexter wasn't around. Even killers like Trinity couldn't see through Dexter's mask, but Brian saw right through it instantly because he shares the same wiring. He figured out Dexter's trophies, his urges, his weak spots, and instead of exposing him, he toyed with a genius like Dexter. That's the kind of psychological mastery Dexter usually has over other killers, but Brian flipped it back on him. And if we're talking combat, Dexter handled killers like Doakes and the Skinner, but Brian had the same knowledge of anatomy, the same killer instincts, and zero hesitation. I would mention Brian is skinnier than Dexter, but somehow Brian managed to overpower Dexter in one situation, kneeing him in the face and escaping. The only reason Dexter won is because Brian had just enough heart somewhere in there to desire a connection with someone like him, his brother. That emotional weakness is what cost him, not a lack of brains or skill. In every other way, Brian was Dexter but more efficient, more cold-blooded, and more ambitious. If you ask me, Brian is what Dexter could have been if Harry never gave him the code. Overall, Brian transcends every other killer on this list and only got caught and killed because he pretty much let himself be caught. Any cops catching on later in the season were only because of Dexter. Brian was playing the maximum difficulty game, killing multiple people, avoiding the police, toying with Dexter, and simultaneously trying to convince Dexter to join him. He underestimated how hard it would be to juggle all these things at once and paid the price for underestimating how much Dexter loved his sister. That being said, no one else on this list could do anything remotely close to what Brian pulled off. Either they get caught by the police or killed by Dexter instantly if they try something like this. So to conclude, I think Lundy has the best detective skills, Leon has the most resources, Trinity has the highest number of kills, Brian is the most dangerous killer, and Dexter I think has the most useful combination of traits in the verse.